Dog's coming. Silhouettes of dogs on a beach. Is there anything better? Well, I think it's time to move on. I was stood there about 45 minutes, which I think the scene justified, because I do love scenes like that. It's the sort of scene that I try and think about on days when I'm sat at home, the sun's shining, I think, oh, there's no point going out to take photos, it's too sunny. I try and look at scenes like that and think, no, you're just thinking about the wrong location if you're not inspired to go out in the sunshine, because places like this I find absolutely delightful when the sun's out, if you can find some contrast and some nice negative space too. Anyway, today I'm in Abersoch here on the Llŷn Peninsula in Wales, and well, I think this truly is probably the last day of summer. I said that a couple of videos ago, but it's now mid-September, and it's not usually this glorious in mid-September, so I'm very happy. I also wanted to talk about ISO today, but I think that's going to have to wait for two reasons. Number one, in this weather it's absolutely ludicrous to talk about ISO, and two, I've forgotten my microphone, as you might be able to hear, picking up all the walking sounds on the beach. So yeah, might have to wait until I have a mic. Well, thanks to the magic of video, I now have a microphone. So I thought what I could do is talk about ISO very briefly before getting back to the photography. Why do I want to talk about ISO? Quite a boring subject. Well, last week I went to go and see some of my book being printed. I spent about half a day at the printers and it was fascinating. Really, really pleased I went. But most of the time I was there, I was thinking about some of the pages at the back of the book. And basically I've dedicated, I think it's 3 or 4 pages to locations and settings for all the photographs that are featured in the book. And if you've bought one of the books, when you get it, you will see that there aren't too many photos in the book that I have shot at base ISO. Now, if you're new to photography, base ISO is basically the lowest ISO your camera will go to outside of the expandable ranges. And the lowest ISO your camera will shoot at, the base ISO, is typically where you'll get the best dynamic range performance and the least amount of noise in your photos. And so, whenever you can shoot at the base ISO on your camera, more often than not, you probably should. So why do I rarely do it? Well, I will try and keep this brief, but basically on my camera, I have got 3 customizable modes. Most cameras have different customizable modes, and I've got them set currently, and I do change this stuff quite a lot, but currently I've got them set to essentially speed of shooting. So position number 1 on the dial is actually set to base ISO, and I will use base ISO, which is ISO 100 on this camera. Sometimes it's 64 on some cameras, other cameras it's 200, but I've got position 1 set to base ISO on my Sony, and I use this when I can, basically. So if I'm collecting enough light to get the shutter speed I want, the aperture I want, and I can still afford to shoot at ISO 100 and get the kind of exposure I want, then I will. The thing is, for my photography, more often than not, I'm in places like that. And in places like Abersoch, regardless of how much light there is, I don't know what's around the corner. I don't know what a dog's going to do, whether it's going to leap up above a fence, whether it's going to bite its owner. Who knows? And in those situations, what I absolutely want to make sure of is that I can get a sharp photo, because there is no point having a photo that's not got much noise, has loads of dynamic range, if it's not sharp. And so it's position and mode 2 on my camera that I use most. And this mode is set to minimum shutter speed in conjunction with auto ISO. Now, I've spoken about minimum shutter speed before, but basically does what it says on the tin. You set a minimum shutter speed that you're happy to shoot at on your camera, and the camera will make sure that you don't go slower than that, provided that you've given auto ISO enough bandwidth in which to operate. There must be a simpler way to describe that. Basically, unless you get to the upper limit of what you've set in auto ISO, your camera will make sure that you don't go below the minimum shutter speed that you've set. So there are lots of times where I might set a minimum shutter speed of a 60th of a second. Sometimes it's 200th of a second. In mode 3, which is for super fast shooting, it's set to 1,000th of a second usually. But what's that got to do with base ISO? Well, In mode 2 and 3, where I'm concerned about getting a sharp shot first and foremost, and where I don't know what it is that I'm going to be shooting most of the time, I set the lower limit of my ISO to 320 on this camera, so above base ISO. Why do I do that? Well, again, it's because my concern is for a sharp photo rather than a completely noiseless one, or one where I've got all the dynamic range but no detail because the photo's not sharp. And photography, more often than not, is about compromise and probability. It's about giving yourself the best possible chance for something akin to the results that you want. And base ISO, in many instances, is not the best tool to achieve that. Now, why ISO 320? Well, this camera in particular, and actually lots of cameras on the market now, has a dual gain output sensor. And what that means essentially is that there are two different noise floors. And there's every chance I'll butcher the technical terms here, but basically you have not much noise at ISO 100, and then traditionally noise has gone up and dynamic range has come down as you raise the ISO. But on this camera at ISO 320, the gain sort of resets. And it's not all the way back down to the levels that you get at ISO 100, but in short, there is less noise and more dynamic range with this camera shooting at ISO 320 than there is shooting at ISO 250. And so you could say, well, if you're concerned about shooting in such a way that you want to make sure that you get sharp shots, why would you not just set ISO 100 as the lower limit of your ISO and set your minimum shutter speed higher? But with this camera, the danger of that is that you end up shooting a lot at ISO 250 when you'd have been better off shooting at ISO 320. I hope that makes sense, some sort of sense. But yeah, I thought I'd answer the question because lots of the photos in my book I've shot at ISO 320, and I thought lots of people might think that that was weird. So yeah, that's a very boring chat on ISO. Let's look at some more photos. My Google Maps is full of pins, and usually I can't remember what is at those pins, but every now and then I get a chance to visit them, and this village is one of those pins. It's beautiful here. Well, I think the light here will be perfect in about an hour's time, but I'm going to leave and come back here another time because somewhere else I want to be for sunset. Another of my pins, which I've just looked at and remembered, and I don't know that there's going to be anywhere to park. Check it out. I don't know if you can hear me because the wind is picking up now, but I really love this composition here. The only problem with it is that one of the power lines goes straight through the islands out to sea. Outside of that, I think here looks really nice. How about if I get a bit closer? Something like that. But I think now I'm going to head back up, give the scene a little bit more breathing room. So I hung around at this spot a little bit more and just enjoyed myself, basically. Lots of the photos have got various degrees of lens flare in them, which basically is the topic of next week's video. Well, not lens flare specifically, but I'll explain when we get there. Anyway, big thank you for watching. I really enjoyed myself with that day out in Abersoch. I'm loving shooting sort of within an hour or so of home at the moment, rather than travelling all the time. So that's been really good fun. Helps when the weather's nice. Really helps. Anyway, a huge thank you to you for watching, and a big thank you also to Squarespace for sponsoring this week's video, where I have just on my Squarespace website updated my gear page to be current. I hadn't done that for a long, long time, and so now you can see basically all the gear I use on a day-to-day basis when I'm out and about shooting. And on a Squarespace website, things like that are very easy to do, despite the fact that I don't know a single line of code. You can also order my book on my website, my presets, my prints, and it acts as a fantastic place to show my portfolio, I find. And to be honest, I think a slick looking website is a crucial tool for all photographers. So if you're a photographer, and I'm guessing you are, and you want somewhere to show your work online that you control entirely, then definitely check out Squarespace and all of their templates that are fantastic for photography. And if you decide that you want a portfolio or an online store or a blog, just somewhere to show off your work, then you can go to squarespace.com to start a free trial. And after that, if you'd like to make a purchase, just go to squarespace.com/James and you'll get 10% off your first purchase. So a huge thank you to Squarespace and a massive thank you to you for watching as well. And I'll be back next week when we'll be sort of talking about lens flares, but not exclusively lens flares. I will explain then. It'll make sense. Hopefully. See you then.